Okay. My name is Bonnie Woods, and I'm speaking from Boston, Massachusetts, USA. I live part of the time in Boston and more of the time in Berlin. I am happy to answer some questions today about my photographs that I shot at Ground Zero right after 9/11. So I originally, I did not go down to New York to be a photographer. New York is only about 4.5 hours away from Boston. And I went down to help some friends of mine who live on the Upper West Side. And just a few days after 9/11, when the buses had started to run again, there were no planes, of course, and there were no trains running down there. And of course, the two planes that flew into the Twin Towers took off from Boston. And so that was also like Boston and New York had a big connection in this whole thing. And I found out later that many people from Boston did go down to help, but more doctors and nurses were sent down there to help. But anyway, I went down to help my friends, and actually the help that she needed got done in just a day or two. And so I thought, well, since I'm down here, maybe I'll check in with the Red Cross and see if they need any help. I mean, the New Yorkers were just in shock. Everyone was just in shock. And the Red Cross office, there was no signage. There were no signs of where to go to help or anything. And so I spent one day making signs for the Red Cross, just so that the volunteers knew where to go. And but it was so disorganized there, and I really wanted to do more than make signs. And so someone at the Red Cross said, "Oh, you should check in with the Salvation Army because they're right downtown, and they're the ones that are in charge of all of the water, all of the food, all of the transport for everything that's going on down around Ground Zero." And I was so impressed with them. So I started working at the headquarters of Salvation Army. I set up a triage desk because what was happening was all of these people were coming in off the street to the Salvation Army looking for a fax machine or looking for socks or looking for dry shoes or looking for something to eat. Because so many of the people down in downtown had been blown out of their apartments, really. I worked there for a few days doing this, and I would see all these people coming in to work. They would come in and check in there first before they would go down to the site, or down to the pile, as some people called it. And one of the colonels said to me one morning, "We're looking for somebody with a camera, and someone said that you were an artist and maybe you have a camera, because we'd like to document what's happening here at the headquarters." And it was really fascinating. They had a whole logistics section and a computer section and a place where they were organizing all the water coming in, all the water donations coming in from all over the country. And so I started documenting the people at the headquarters indoors. So this was not at Ground Zero. I actually ended up working at Ground Zero up until October 4th. The Salvation Army and most of the volunteer groups down there were very strict about how long you could work at Ground Zero. They only let you work there for 2 weeks. Okay, I was at Ground Zero the 2 weeks prior to October 4th. However, that works out. That was because of the Salvation Army, largely. They have all these transport vehicles and all of these food trucks, basically, and tents, and they know how to go down and set these things up. And the interesting thing that I found was that all of the people that are working at in these disaster areas are also trained chaplains or trained psychologists. So that's also part of the picture. And that to me was also fascinating. When I did get to ground zero, I mean, there was like a whole periphery around this big gaping hole. And there was just a little tiny trail that you could walk around. And it was hot. It was hot from all of the ash. The Salvation Army was giving out boots, and they were all like big men's sizes. And so I didn't take any of the boots on the first day, and I ruined my sneakers. I mean, it's like they just melted. They just melted. And so after that, I did finally find a pair of boots that fit me. And I would just walk the periphery to these different food sites around, because that was the one place where people could take off their protective gear. We had to wear hard hats, we had to wear goggles, we had to wear gloves, we had to wear face masks. But once you went inside of the food tents, the dust was not falling, you know? And so it was a little bit cleaner, and you could talk to people there. And so that's where I started out, just going from one food facility to another, you know. But when I got down, when I did go there, and as I said, it was maybe 10, 11 days after the actual attacks, they were still looking for living people at that time. And there's one shot, there was lines and lines of ambulances with this wishful thinking that they were going to find people, live people. And there was a morgue that was set up, and there were very strict rules. Like, if I happened to see any body or any body parts, I was not allowed to touch it. I was not allowed to photograph body parts. And that's fair. I wouldn't have wanted to do that anyway. We would call the police, and they would call the fire department, you know, the fire workers. And then they would come, and they would come with stretchers. And every once in a while you would see firemen with stretchers and a blanket over the stretcher. And you knew that there was not a whole person under that blanket. I mean, they were if they found anything, they were finding body parts. But they had, anyway, it was just wishful thinking, really, but they really thought they were going to find people.
You show like that lamp post, which looks like it has some kind of decoration. And then you read the caption, and it says that those are blinds from an office building that got blown out and wrapped around the lamp post.
Yeah, and that was right around St. Paul's Chapel. That was another haven there where the volunteer workers could go, and because there were church pews, and you could go in there, and you could just lie down in the pews and just rest. You could take a nap, and it was the only place near Ground Zero where you could actually lie down and take a nap. And so many of the people did take advantage of that. And there were also a lot of later in the stay, you know, as time went on and they got more organized, they were bringing in chiropractors and people giving massages and things like that. Volunteers were coming in from all over. As I say, not just at Ground Zero, but all of those apartments around there got all blown out, and people lost all of their possessions. And so people didn't even have simple things like underwear and socks and things like that. And so the Red Cross and the Salvation Army were centers where they needed all kinds of volunteers, like to hand out socks. the Red Cross had another offsite location down by the piers, down in the Hudson. And they had taken over. This is a little bit later. They got better organized. And they started doing all of the counseling for the spouses of first responders who had died. But, you know, I was palling around or walking the perimeter sometimes with these chaplains, and everyone kept saying, you know, after you're here for a while, you need to talk with somebody because you're going to have to unload. Well, I thought, well, I'm spending all my time with chaplains. I don't need that, you know. And it was the same thing as like, you know, somehow believing that my jogging shoes were not going to melt, you know. I was also thinking that I was not going to get sick, or I was not going to get mentally disturbed by this. And sure enough, I mean, you know, my last day there, I only worked part of the day because I was starting to hallucinate. I was hearing people cry out, you know, I was seeing hands coming out of the ashes, you know, begging for me to come and pull them out. I mean, completely irrational, but I started hearing things and seeing things. And I thought, well, I just stopped working, and I went down to, you know, I went all the way down to the end of Manhattan, and I took the Staten Island ferry. You know, I just needed to, that's what I did on my birthday, but I just needed to somehow, you know. And people talk about before 9/11 and after 9/11 in America, and there really was a big difference afterwards. Right around 9/11 is when everybody's, just as a show of solidarity, started putting American flags up, which was different from the more xenophobic use of the flags later, I think. But yeah, they had flags on their hats, and you're wearing flags, and at the time it gave you a nice warm feeling. It was like, okay, we're all in this, we're in this together, and we're going to get through it. And, you know, the old American spirit and everything. And I was just, every day there were more flags hung out, you know. It's towards the end of my stay, it was like almost every house had a flag hanging for every apartment, you know, or hanging flags out the window. And it was just, it felt right. It felt absolutely right at the time. Oh yeah. Yeah. Everything went 24/7. And I had a lot of restrictions in terms of how I could shoot. I was not allowed to use a tripod because, well, as I said, the paths were very narrow, and you couldn't block a path with a tripod, you know. And I couldn't use a flash. And that was because they were still afraid of explosions. I mean, things were still exploding, you know, and they were afraid that if photographers used flashes, then the police or fire would think that there was some explosion, and they would run over, and, you know, and so we could not use a flash. We had to wear all this protective gear, but I couldn't wear it because you can't take a photograph if you've got goggles and a mask and gloves on, you know. The reason for that was that everything was a haze, everything was smoky. And you mentioned to me earlier that when the photographs were being printed, that they took out the haze. I'm not sure whether I'm not sure how they're going to look, you know, because the haze was really there, and it was very, very smoky, and it was all particles. It was asbestos and ground glass and smoke from, you know, from the heat, from the ashes and everything. Another thing that I did not have with me was a telephoto lens, and I carry a camera around with me, but you never expect you're really going to need to use it like I needed to use it. It was my old FTB, my old Canon FTB, big heavy thing. And so there were a lot of shots that I wanted to get that I couldn't. And one was just this very surreal thing in all of the trees behind St. Paul's. For some reason, they were not destroyed. St. Paul's was not destroyed. It was very, very strange. But up in the trees, and they were the only trees left standing around there, there were pieces of clothing hanging from the upper branches. In some ways, the night lighting, because they had those big spotlights that they use, like for movies and things. That's what they were using. So to light everything up so they could work at night, and that actually made it easier to take photographs of things like that. Yeah, people were working around the clock, and I tried to get night shots as well as day shots, just because it was, it was realistic. I mean, for me, I mean, I'm the same as probably a lot of other Americans. There was a definite before 9/11 and after 9/11, and I think I have to admit, I have not been down to the site to see any of the museums or the ponds or the landscaping or anything like that. I've had no desire to go down. Everyone tells me you have to go down there. I have not done it. I went down there once, maybe 2 years afterwards, when they were doing the excavation, and that they had cleared out all the rubble, of course, by then, and there was a big hole. And I was actually horrified that there were tourists going down there and just standing there together. And this was like before selfies. That it was still quite a while ago. It was before you could take a selfie with your phone. But people taking pictures of each other with the site behind them, and smiling, and I was horrified, and that was enough of a turnoff that made me not want to. I have not been down there since, and so that was maybe 18 years ago or so. And you talk to New Yorkers, the New Yorkers are still in shock. They are still in shock. Even the people who did not lose loved ones, it was just a watershed, just a watershed time. So I mean, I'm glad that it's being remembered. I have never shown these photographs in the States, because right after 9/11, the event was being used as a reason to go to war and to set up prisoner camps and to torture people and to kill people with drones. And I have very mixed feelings about how the event has been used politically. I would like to see them all together again. And I think they're important because they show the actual people who were working there. I mean, really good-hearted, kind people. And yeah.
Thank you, Bonnie, for the amazing work. We're super proud to show it, and thanks for giving people an idea of what it was like and what the creative process was like.